number of sessions. So this week we're going to be moving north. So as Lynn was showing me the palm trees in the background, I'm a little jealous of that of the warmer weather. And even some warmer climates, unfortunately, looking at Texas is getting very crazy weather and unfortunately major storms. I used to live in San Antonio actually, and seeing and hearing from people who are no power, no water. It's very, very scary. Hopefully things will get better soon. But we're going to be moving to colder climates today. We'll look at moving north, the northernmost synagogues in the world. And then next week, we'll kind of move south to the southernmost synagogues in the world. And I guess when you get far enough south, it starts to get cold also once you move farther and farther south away from the equator. And then we'll have sessions. I want to have a session dedicated to actually synagogues in the United States. You know, United States is, together with Israel, the two largest Jewish communities in the world. And while we've looked at synagogues here and there, kind of focus on synagogues in the United States, and then a session on synagogues in Israel, the two largest communities. And there were a couple other ideas, island synagogues on islands in the mountains, tracing synagogues from basically the Sephardic diaspora, if you will, synagogues after the expulsion from Spain and kind of the migration of synagogues. So all great ideas. So we'll do all of those, and I'll have a session dedicated also to synagogues in sub-Saharan Africa, which we don't necessarily think of as a Jewish hotbed. I know we looked at this community in Uganda, and I think a synagogue in Congo, actually, briefly in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, formerly Zaire. But there are synagogues throughout the world and in many countries, even in Africa. I know we looked at Northern Africa, but we'll look there as well. So that's kind of an overview of some of the sessions that we'll have left, and love to hear input to share other synagogues. Before we start traveling north, though.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
At some point when you have a chance, could you give us a list of all the synagogues we have seen, even if it's just a text list, you know, a Word document or a Excel spreadsheet that has all the names of the synagogues on a map and the countries.
Right, if you were, I'm working on a map that has like little dots where each synagogue is to click on the map as well.
Okay, thank you.
I think I showed, it's a work in progress, but by the end I'll have it finished and happy to send. I can pull it up now if you want to see it, but I'm working on that in my Google Drive here.
Rabbi, this is Fran. Did you receive the article that I sent about Polish architecture?
Oh, yes, thank you.
You know, I wish I had an email list of the classmates. I would have sent it to everybody. If you have a moment,
it's a great article, yeah.
I wanted to just make one comment. We talked about some of the synagogues in Poland being in the fortress style. And we wondered about that. And that article answered the question, folks. They actually were built typically in the 17th century to serve dual purposes of also being fortresses to defend the city. And they were set up to have high windows and thick walls, and sometimes even openings to put guns and rifles through. And in these cities, the Jews were expected to pay for the arsenal to protect the city, which included everybody with these fortresses. But for example, in my family's hometown, Hushatin, the town was divided by the Zbruch River, and one half of the town was in Austria-Hungary, and the other half of the town was in Russia. So it was a border town in the strictest sense of the word, and it made sense that they built a fortress because the fortresses were typically against the Cossacks or against the Tatars. So that's where that style came from, particularly in the buildings that were built around the 16th and 17th centuries. Who knew?
Yeah. Good, no, interesting. And I'll bring, if you want to put the link in the chat here, I think it was a great article, yeah. and shared some insight into synagogue building.
To be honest, I'm not sure how to go back to my email and not lose you guys and come back.
So maybe I'll get it right now. Let me see if I can pull it up, and yeah, I'll put it in.
I'm good, but I'm not that good. The article is actually in Polish,
There.
but in the upper right-hand corner, you can go to English translation, and then the whole thing is in English.
Right,
It's very
Google.
easy to
Right.
follow.
Good. So yeah, I just put it in. It's a Polish article, right? But you can use Google
It was written
Translate.
by somebody my daughter-in-law knows. My daughter-in-law is Polish.
Mhm.
It's a terrific article. It gives a whole history of architecture in Poland through the ages, and the examples and how it developed. I think you'll find it fascinating. I think it answers some of the questions we've been raising.
That's a great article. Thank you. So before we start moving north, I wanted to share one synagogue I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago, but then we didn't actually get to it last week, is a relatively new synagogue just built, well, I shouldn't say relatively, very new synagogue built just in 2017, was dedicated. This is the Safra Synagogue in Monaco, which has the largest number of Jews by percentage of the country's population outside of Israel, just under 5%. That comprises just a couple thousand Jews, actually, as Monaco only has a total population of about 30,000. But they built the Safra family. We've seen other Safra synagogues. Edmund Safra was a very notable and extremely affluent Jewish banker, Lebanese Brazilian banker, and gave a lot of money. The family gave a lot of money to build synagogues actually all over the world. So there's a Safra synagogue in Jerusalem, Safra synagogue in New York City, and now actually the Safra synagogue in Monaco, built actually to resemble a Sefer Torah, especially if you think of a Sephardic Sefer Torah, which opens. You can see the building was actually designed to look like a Torah scroll. And the interior is entirely in this circular shape. Here's a picture as well of the interior and of the ark, but is all in this round shape. I think you can see this is a picture actually of this is the website of the architects showing some pictures of the project. The project actually took 1 year and 5 months to build. It was a long, a building project built in a style resembling Jerusalem stone. I don't know, I need to look to see whether they actually imported it from Jerusalem, but you can kind of get a sense of the style, the ark. And here, just scrolling through pictures of what the building looks like. But just a few years old, a brand new synagogue built in Monaco to support a growing Jewish community, and although small, still comprises a significant percentage of the population in Monaco. So before we move on, we're gonna move progressively north as we go through this morning. But any guesses where the northernmost Jewish community in the world is, or northernmost synagogue in the world is?
Siberia or Alaska?
Okay, Siberia or Alaska, both good guesses. All right,
But wrong.
we'll
But wrong.
now we'll move forward and see. But I wanted to start with our neighbor to the north, not the northernmost synagogue, but a synagogue actually that's close to me. I've been here many times, especially growing up and working at Camp Ramon, Canada. Many friends that have gone to this congregation and work at this congregation as well. But Beth Tzedek in Toronto is notable actually as the largest conservative synagogue by membership in the world. Actually, the synagogue today has 2,200 families. Is really quite an operation. And actually, there's a day school that runs inside of the synagogue that my sister teaches at. She's a kindergarten teacher at Robbins Hebrew Academy, which is housed in the synagogue. It's actually as a Solomon Schechter day school. And of all synagogues in the world, in North America, but really in the world, has the largest membership of any conservative synagogue, and housed in Toronto, which of course is one of the largest Jewish communities in the world. Nearly 200,000 strong in Toronto, and very centrally located along one major thoroughfare, Bathurst Street, which kind of runs north-south through the city. And the vast majority of the Jewish community actually lives within a mile east or west of the street, as you just drive up and down from downtown Toronto all the way up to the suburbs north of the city. So I don't know if anyone has any particular connection to the Toronto community, if you wanted to share anything, but this just wanted to share as we move north. Doesn't mean the communities are necessarily getting smaller. Beth Tzedek is the largest conservative synagogue worldwide by membership.
My cousin, who was a rabbi, before he completed the rabbinate, he lived in Toronto, and he was the teacher in the religious school at Beth Tzedek.
Oh, Beth Tzedek, good, good.
Yeah, so that's my only connection.
Good, no, good.
How old is this building? Is it, I mean, it looks relatively new. Were they somewhere else before?
Yeah, so this building is the result of a merger of two synagogues in the 1960s. I can look up quickly. So, yeah, this building itself is from 1955.
Oh.
But the synagogue, the community had previous buildings. It started in 1883. Was when the synagogue was established, but this building is from 1955.
Not having to do with Beth Tzedek, but B'nai Yeshurun does have a Toronto connection in that one of our former rabbis, David Seed, is rabbi up there, and I'm drawing a blank on the synagogue right now. But we've been up there many times seeing them.
I think it's Adath Israel. That David Seed is at now.
Thank you.
And actually, Adath Israel also has a rabbi, Adam Cutler, who's married to a B'nai Yeshurun congregant or someone who grew up at B'nai Yeshurun, Linda
Powers.
Powers, right. So Deborah Powers' husband was actually the assistant rabbi at Beth Tzedek, the congregation we just looked at, but he went to become the senior rabbi at Adath Israel just a couple of years ago. But there's another B'nai Yeshurun connection to Beth Tzedek and to Toronto. And of course, myself and many people from the congregation grew up going to Camp Ramah in Canada, where many people are also from Toronto. So there have been strong connections to this congregation and to the Toronto Jewish community.
Not only that, before the Men's Club international community reconfigured, Toronto was part of the organization that Cleveland was part of. And so we used to go up to Toronto at least once a year to meet with the Toronto delegation, and they've been down to Cleveland many times. They have since, Toronto has since split off, and Canada has become its own region. And Cleveland is now part of with Cincinnati and several other cities.
Right. No, thank you. Right. So the region has shifted, but Toronto has always been closely connected and really just a 5-hour drive or so. So it closely connected, and probably the nearest, the largest community, Jewish community within that distance. But we're going to move a little further north to another large Jewish community, London. And interesting, right? London is actually quite a bit further north, even though we might not think of it as north of Canada. But if you look at the latitude, London is actually much further north than Toronto. And we're looking right now at Bevis Mark Synagogue, the oldest synagogue in continuous building and in continuous use in England. Why isn't my, oh, sorry, we're gonna, just a little about Bevis Mark Synagogue, and I know there's many synagogues in London, which maybe we'll come to in a future session, but Bevis Mark Synagogue dates back, this building was dedicated in the year 1701. The congregation community actually dates back to 1663, and this is actually people from the Spanish and Portuguese community, so it's it's from Jews that kind of came from post the Spanish expulsion and created their community, brought their community to England. And the interior was designed based on the Portuguese Synagogue of Amsterdam, which was built in 1675. But this building really is the heart of the Sephardic community in London. And the synagogue has also served as a place where they've tried to work to deal with challenges to the Jewish communities all over the world. They appealed to Jamaica to reduce taxes that were put on the Jews of Jamaica in the 1700s, quarrels with Jews in Barbados in the 1700s. They fought on behalf of Jews that were being forced to convert or attempt forcibly conversion in Gibraltar in the late 1700s, and really have this congregation has really served as a place to really fight on behalf of Jewish communities around the world during its history. It also was the congregation of Moses Montefiore. I know we saw his personal congregation, but this was the congregation that he prayed at. That was his community. Also, the community of Isaac Disraeli, the scholar, but probably most notable is the father of Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli. So this congregation has a storied history in England.
What about its name?
Sorry?
What about its name? It's so unusual. Bevis Marks. Doesn't
Well,
sound.
it's named for the area that it's the area of London that it's in, I believe.
Thank you.
So right, Bevis Marks is actually the name of the street that the synagogue is on. So that's how it got its name.
It's surprising that it hasn't switched over to a Hebrew name in all these years. That it's known by Bevis Marks.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. It's interesting in Cleveland. The opposite in some ways has been true, that synagogues had Hebrew names, but then adopted names based on where they were located, or different name. I mean, our synagogue has gone back, but for a long time was known right as Temple on the Heights, but originally was B'nai Yeshurun.
Where is it in London?
So Bevis Marks, I have my map set here, but if you're familiar with London, you can see, are you guys able to see the map?
Yep.
We'll
Yes.
zoom out so that you can see where, if you see the little dot that says Bevis Marks.
Just roughly.
It's right near, if you're familiar with the Gherkin, the building that's like almost like a futuristic looking building.
Okay.
It's right near there.
So
it's
if
right
you
near-
were, for those of you who know London at all, if you were at the tower, it's still a little bit north and east of there. But, not terribly far from the oldest part of the city.
Right, because I mean, this building has been around since 1700, 1701. It's near the center of town, right? It's much closer into the center of town than where the hearts of the Jewish communities in London are today. But yeah, just.
And it's 23 minutes by car from the British Museum, if anybody knows where the British Museum is.
Okay.
About half an hour from Victoria Station, another great big landmark of London. So that's.
Right. So, but you can see why it's not exactly on the tourist map, because it's not near the places you would normally go on the underground or, whatever. It's a little off of there.
Right. We can look at the interior here, and you actually can. I mean, not during COVID, but they do offer tours of the synagogue that you can go to if you're ever in London and want to find it. It is designed, if you look, similar to the Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam, and we've seen other synagogues that were based on that model. They use that as the model for their congregation. And of course, in London, also with about 200,000 Jews, similar size to Toronto, one of the largest Jewish communities in the world, and of course, many synagogues, especially in Golders Green and a number of other neighborhoods, which are kind of more known as the Jewish, quote unquote, Jewish neighborhoods. But this synagogue closer into the center of town and hasn't moved. I mean, imagine if we were still in the original B'nai Yeshurun buildings, would be much closer into downtown. In fact, the first one, right, is where Progressive Field is today, in the outfield. So if we went back to our original buildings, would be much closer to the inner city or center of town. Moving further north, we have the Dublin Hebrew congregation. Judaism, not as strong certainly as in London, but a Jewish community does exist in Ireland, mostly around Dublin. You still see the synagogue?
I think Dublin used to have a Jewish mayor.
Yes, they did. Yes,
Yeah.
they did. Yep.
So Dublin, right, has never been a huge Jewish community. Oh, good. And thank you, Eric, for your experience. You were at Beavis Marks and helped make the minyan there. Very good. But Dublin's community has never been large, but has in the late 1800s, early 1900s hit its apex with about 1,500 people. And it's still kind of around that number. This synagogue is the largest synagogue today in Dublin. There's also, this is, I believe, the Orthodox synagogue. There is a progressive synagogue as well. But Dublin's Jewish community is unique right now in that it's actually a growing Jewish community, unlike many other places throughout Europe where the communities are dwindling. The Jewish community in Ireland today actually numbers about 2,500, with about 2/3 living in Dublin. And between 2011 and today, the Jewish population has actually increased by over 30%, mostly by foreigners moving in for various businesses that have set up offices in Ireland. Most prominently, the number of Israelis has gone way up. A lot of Israelis moving around the world, but Ireland has gained a large number of Israelis moving out of Israel for various business opportunities to Ireland, which has bolstered the Jewish community there. And so while it's never been a huge Jewish community, it actually has grown just in the past 10 years. And the Terranor Synagogue, which is in the neighborhood which has the largest Jewish population, is seeing an influx of Jews. And right, as you mentioned, Dublin has even had a Jewish mayor, has been a place that has been welcoming to Jews. There have been some instances of anti-Semitism in various places, but this is as we move a little further north, that there is an Irish Jewish population and Jewish community as well. Has anyone here been to? I need to admit, I actually was in Dublin, but didn't make it to the synagogue or to the Jewish community. So I don't know if there's anyone here that's been to Dublin and been to the Jewish community.
I've been to Dublin, but never saw the synagogue.
I have a question.
Yes.
Wasn't the Rav Herzog from Ireland? Herzog.
Yeah, it's actually, now that you mention it, we can look it up, but Isaac Herzog, we can look it up right here. I'll look it up with you. But you may be correct, although, is it Isaac? Oh no, Rabbi Herzog, let me.
No, Herzog's father, the president's, the Rav Herzog.
Rabbi
Yeah,
Joyce.
Chief Rabbi of Ireland, yes.
Yep.
Rabbi Herzog.
Isaac Boogie Herzog.
Yeah, his nationality was Irish. So it looks like he lived in a few places, but he was Chief Rabbi of Ireland among his titles. Yeah. So no, very interesting. So as we continue to move a little further north, come to Copenhagen. So I don't know, before we look at and talk about Copenhagen, is there anyone that's been to the synagogue in Copenhagen?
I've been to Copenhagen, but only could see the outside because it was heavily guarded.
Okay, right, as is true in many communities, is that tends to be the case. But
And you know that there was an incident a few years ago there, right?
yeah, there was, yes. Right, no, unfortunately, a number of these synagogues have had incidents at them, which I didn't want to focus on now, but unfortunately that is a reality, a sad reality in many places. But this synagogue is unique, built in the Egyptian revival style. We saw a couple synagogues, I think one in Australia that was built in the Egyptian revival style. And it uses some Egyptian elements in the columns and ceiling, but has also used the Greek and Roman revival style. This synagogue was built in 1833. It was completed, this building. And we'll take a look. We'll tour inside the building, a beautiful synagogue. Right, in 1985, unfortunately, there was a terrorist attack, a bomb that was placed in the synagogue. Fortunately didn't injure anyone, but did do some damage. And again, in 2015, there was a shooting outside the synagogue, which did kill one member of the community. And so for that reason, and just generally, our synagogue, even at B'nai Yeshurun, but all over the world, synagogue security has been beefed up. And unfortunately, the synagogue did have an attack just 5 years ago. But we'll take a look. Of course, you probably know some of the history of the Jews in Copenhagen and in Denmark, and the fascinating story during the Holocaust, saving the vast majority of Jews in Denmark, with the king declaring, if the Jews are required to wear a yellow star, then I'm going to wear a yellow star as well. And really the entire country put on the yellow stars, and through tremendous effort managed to bring, in a clandestine operation, send the vast majority of the Jewish community to Sweden by boat overnight to save the Jewish community, and actually transferred the Torahs to a neighboring church to save the Torahs from the synagogue as well, which were returned to the synagogue following the Holocaust. So really a tremendous story of the Danes doing everything they could to save the Jewish community. We'll take a look at the interior. I know you can see a picture, but we'll go inside. Here, and I'll try to move slowly. I know the video doesn't always move at the same rate, but we will explore. Are you guys able to see?
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's a beautiful synagogue, and actually this allows us to move to different parts of the synagogue. Right now we're on in the Amud where the davening and Torah reading takes place. Here's the ark. You can see the columns in kind of almost an Egyptian elements to this Greek revival style. And this dates back almost 200 years to 1833.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
were Danish Jews a combination of Sephardic coming from the expulsion, or were they mostly Ashkenazic, or both?
There's some mix here. I have those statistics that I can pull up here. So the Jewish community, the earliest Jews in Denmark date back to the 1600s. it looks like they first came from Germany, which is just south. So it's Ashkenazi predominantly, but they also, Sephardic Jews were allowed to reside in Denmark as well. So there were actually both communities. There was a point actually where the king was persuaded to allow Sephardic Jews to reside in Denmark while conducting trade, and Ashkenazi Jews were actually forbidden from coming to Denmark. But ultimately, there were both populations that ended up in Denmark. So it's a mix. And today, I'm trying to see. It looks like someone might know more. I'm just kind of looking at the at today, but it looks like it's Ashkenazi predominantly, but there are some Sephardic Jews as well. Today, Denmark's Jewish population numbers about 6,000 across the country, with Copenhagen being the largest single community.
I think Bill Schwartz from our temple, his family is he's from some Scandinavian country. I think it might be Denmark. I don't
He's from
really remember.
Sweden.
Oh, from Sweden.
Is it from Sweden? Excuse me.
Okay, well, we're going to be, as we move further and further north, we'll get to Sweden here in just a minute. If I can figure out how to get us out of the out of the synagogue in Copenhagen, but before Sweden, so this is in order by where the latitude is, a little north of Copenhagen, but not yet as far north as Stockholm. We actually hit the Scottish Jewish community, and there's actually there's been a strong Jewish community in Scotland for many years. In fact, there's a certain suburb of Glasgow which is over 5% Jewish itself, and a few areas which have sizable Jewish minorities. The Garnet Hill Synagogue is one of the congregations and probably the most notable synagogue in Glasgow, which is the heart of the Scottish Jewish community. In just a minute. So Scotland has a history of Jews actually dating back to at least the 17th century. Most Scottish Jews are Ashkenazi, and actually first came to Edinburgh, and then kind of migrated to Glasgow. And there's about 6,000 Jews actually in Scotland as well. Still a very small percentage of the total population, but Scotland has had a strong Jewish community for a couple hundred years. And this particular synagogue, the Garnet Hill Synagogue, was actually built in 1879. So it has a long history. It's known as the, quote, cathedral synagogue in Scotland, and was designed kind of based on a cathedral model, as you can see the exterior, in Romanesque style. And the community in Glasgow itself can be date back to the early 1800s. This synagogue sorry, just a second. But no, the synagogue opened officially in 1879. And there was an influx of Jews starting in the 1880s, just as the United States saw millions of Jews come in. Scotland saw a much smaller number, but there were Jews from Eastern Europe that actually immigrated to bolster Scotland's Jewish community. And Glasgow serves really as the center of that community today. So 6,000 Jews in Scotland, centered in Glasgow. And this particular synagogue is actually a center of civic life. They host events that are not only for the Jewish community, but for the general community as well, as a center of culture in Glasgow. So I don't know if there's anyone that has some experience in the Scottish Jewish community or at the synagogue. Love to hear any thoughts or anything you have to add.
Yeah, I guess I can speak to this.
Yep.
I had an extended time in Scotland in the 80s. And so I was at this particular synagogue in I guess, the early 90s.
Mhm.
And there actually is a big enough community to have kosher food available. So that was my source. London's too far away. So there are tiny communities, at least at that time, there are tiny communities also on the coast in
Yeah.
Dundee and Aberdeen. And I spent one Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur in Dundee. So
Oh, wow. Mhm.
that's pretty. Most of the people were Dutch, were not Scottish. They were either English or they were working in the oil fields. So they had
Okay.
various nationalities. So it was an interesting experience.
Oh, good, good.
Carrie
So I-
Gross, Carrie Gross has family in Glasgow. I was friends with one of her cousins, and actually I was trying to get her cousin and Carrie to meet in Israel. That Carrie's, the Tobias family, which is her maiden name, is originally from Glasgow.
Oh, okay. Very interesting. Anything else about the Scottish Jewish community? No. Okay, so we'll continue to
you're
move a
right.
little. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Last comment is, I think you're right that this is the center of the Jewish community of Scotland. There are, I said, there's smaller communities in other cities, but this is the focus.
Right. This is where the largest community is.
So the last little tidbit is I did say for Kiddush, and Kiddush was basically afternoon tea.
Nice. So we're going to move a little further north to Stockholm, the Stockholm Synagogue, a beautiful synagogue here, and we'll make it full screen for a minute here. But this is the synagogue in Stockholm. Ve'asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham, as the phrase in the front. Build me a sanctuary, and I will dwell among the people. It's actually from the Torah reading this week. Truma is actually the phrase that's right here on the front of the synagogue. This synagogue, notably, before I share a little, and maybe some can add more, this synagogue may be the northernmost conservative synagogue in the world. I don't know that for a fact. It's not affiliated with the United States United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, but is a practicing Masorti conservative synagogue. In fact, I was classmates in rabbinical school with someone who grew up at the synagogue in Stockholm because his father was actually the rabbi here, Rabbi Gerber, as a JTS. It was a conservative synagogue. I don't recall. I think his son, he studied there, but certainly his son, who now is a conservative rabbi, grew up, although his parents were originally American, he grew up in Stockholm because his father was serving as the rabbi at the synagogue, and later moved to New York to study and is now a rabbi himself, Rabbi Jeremy Gerber. But this synagogue is a member of the Union for Progressive Judaism, but really practices as a Masorti, a conservative synagogue. So a word about the Swedish Jewish community. Of course, Sweden was neutral during World War II, and so it was a neutral territory, and that was how the Danish community was able to bring their Jews to Sweden and to escape the Nazis. But this synagogue is the largest and oldest of 3 synagogues in Stockholm, and is actually right in the city center, not far from Gamla stan, the old town. Was inaugurated in 1870, which was actually when there were some remaining restrictions on the legal status of Jews living in Sweden. They were abolished, and so the synagogue was inaugurated at that time. But it replaced an earlier synagogue dating from 1795. So this synagogue was designed to be reminiscent of, quote, the Oriental lands, according to the builders. And it really is a monumental synagogue, as we can see from the style. Was actually originally built it was originally serving as a Reform congregation, and now today a conservative congregation. it has interesting practices that are developed because it's really the Congregation for Progressive Jews. So there is services do have an organ played by a non-Jewish musician on Friday nights, and then have a choir at times on Shabbat morning and on holidays. As you can see, it has a balcony. In early years, it actually has both a mixed section and separate seating sections, depending on what people want as they come to the synagogue. But this is the Great Synagogue of Stockholm. And yeah, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, it's on the bima is a menorah that was given by the king, and it's engraved telling the information on it, and it must stay on the bima per the king's instructions when he gave it to them.
Right, thank you.
Also, there's a wall right next to the synagogue that lists all the names of the Holocaust survivors that went to Stockholm. And when we were there, we had just found Paul's cousins. He has third cousins in Stockholm that we spent a week with several years ago. And we were able to find the names of Paul's cousins that survived the Holocaust and were able to immigrate to Sweden when the United States had filled its quota and wouldn't take any more survivors at one point. And we were able to not only identify his immediate cousins, but some extended cousins also. And it's also interesting that there is a path between the synagogue and this wall that is made up of cobblestones that were taken from one of the concentration camps. And it leads to a plaza that is the Raoul Wallenberg Plaza in commemoration of Wallenberg.
Wow, good.
Did you mention how large that community is, Rabbi?
In Stockholm?
Well, yeah.
Let me look. I actually didn't, but
I mean, I assume all the Jews are in Stockholm.
there are, the majority are, but
Thanks, Maddie.
what did Maddie?
4,500.
4,500, thank you for
Rabbi,
looking up. So 4,500, right? So all of these, so there are, I mean, while they're not huge communities, there are communities throughout the Scandinavian countries. And we're gonna move actually to the next community in Oslo, Norway, which has a unique synagogue here. But Norway also has a Jewish community. This synagogue was actually completed in the congregation was established in 1892. This particular building is from 1920. In 2009, the King and Crown Prince of Norway visited the congregation. But this is this shows, I mean, Judaism in Norway dates back to the 1400s. There may have even been traders during the Middle Ages, but the first Jewish community dates back to the 1400s. Denmark ruled Norway for about almost 300 years, from the mid 1500s to early 1800s, and then was ruled by Sweden. So Judaism wasn't necessarily, there was a ban against kind of formal Jewish communities, but this first Jewish community in Norway was established in Oslo in 1892. Today, the Jewish community is smaller than its neighboring countries, Sweden and Denmark, but today there's about 1,500 Jews in Norway as a whole. and most are based in Oslo. There's 2 synagogues. We're going to see the other synagogue a little later as we move even further north in Trondheim, which is the northernmost synagogue in Europe, actually. But this synagogue is the heart of the Jewish community in Oslo. Is the main synagogue. Yeah, Jackie?
My son was in Norway some years ago, and there was evidently another synagogue that he had asked directions to, and he was having a terrible time finding it. And apparently it was a wooden front, very plain, and did not have any marking except carved into the doorway, very small, was a Magen David. But he said finding it was very difficult.
Yeah.
And apparently they sort of stay under wraps there. That
Yeah.
There's enough anti-Semitism that he couldn't, it took quite a lot of doing to find it.
Well, I'm glad he managed to find it, but
He was very persistent.
Yeah, good. I know you know this next community, and we don't need to spend that long. You can share any more, but I know, Jackie, you've shared about it. But actually, St. Petersburg, which is quite far north, is actually north of Stockholm and Copenhagen and the places we've been. But the beautiful Grand Choral Synagogue in St. Petersburg, which I'll just share, we can go to. Here's the interior of the synagogue. Of course, St. Petersburg is our sister city, our sister community, paired with our federation and with the Jewish community here.
We had a very nice experience there because we had an official tour, and the cantor from that synagogue gave us a concert. He had a pianist there, and his English was amazing. And I said, you speak such good English. Well, it turns out he had studied with Chabad on Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, and had lived in Brooklyn for a number of years while he was studying under the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And
Wow.
so that's why his English was so perfect. But he was beautifully trained in the School of Arts that was one of the presidents of that school was Tchaikovsky. And so he was a wonderful singer. He sang a mix of Hebrew and Yiddish. It was just beautiful. They're looking for money to do the work on the exterior of the synagogue.
Yeah.
The interior.
Here's a picture of the exterior of the synagogue.
Yeah, but they were having difficulty raising money to do a lot of the repairs that were necessary. The interior was paid for by Edmund Safra before he was killed. He died under mysterious circumstances.
He did, yeah. A fire that was later ruled as arson, but yeah.
Yeah.
And St. Petersburg does have a sizable Jewish community and people that are kind of rediscovering. Does anyone know? I could look it up here, but the Jewish population in St. Petersburg.
I don't know, but it is frequented by a lot of tourists.
Yeah, certainly the synagogue is. I am looking today. The Jewish population is actually roughly 40,000, it looks like, today.
The other synagogues were torn down because the official view was if they have one big synagogue, they don't need any others. They didn't understand anything about.
That was a policy
needs.
under Soviet, yeah.
But it still exists.
One synagogue allowed, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So as we continue, thank you. As we continue to move further north, Finland also has Jewish communities. These are 2 synagogues. One in, the first one actually with the green dome is in a city called Turku, Finland. And then the red dome is in Helsinki. The 2 synagogues that exist today in Finland. Finland, here, just a second, let me put my notes. Finland. A fascinating story in Finland, and interesting. Jews were actually only allowed to settle in only 3 centers until 1809. And only when Finland gained independence in 1917 did Jews actually receive civil rights. So in the period leading to World War II, there were about 2,000 Jews in Finland, most due to immigration from Soviet Russia after the Russian Revolution. But fascinating and interesting that Finland was an ally of Germany, of the Nazis during World War II. And there were actually Jews that fought in the Finnish army alongside the Nazis. And interestingly enough, those Jews and Finland didn't suffer any casualties because it was an ally. The Jews, interestingly, fought alongside Nazis. And as an interesting story, they fought alongside non-Jewish countrymen. And there were some that actually brought a Torah and actually held services during the war alongside the Nazis, and the Jews in Finland were not harmed. In fact, the Nazis came to Finland and to the King of Finland to say, "Can we take care of your Jewish problem?" And the king said, "There is no Jewish problem here." So a very interesting story of the Jews in Finland. Today, there's about 1,500 Jews in Finland, about 1,200 in Helsinki, and about 300 in Turku, which really are the two communities of Jews in Finland today. Has anyone been to Finland or to either of these communities?
Been to Finland, but not to the
Jewish community. Yeah. Here's the interior, actually, of the Turku synagogue. So now we're coming to some of the northernmost. This is the northernmost synagogue in all of Europe, the Trondheim synagogue. For some reason, it's taking too long to load. But Trondheim, Norway, also has the distinguished, oh, thank you, Maddie, right. There's a book about the Finnish Jews who fought alongside the Nazis, Strangers in a Strange Land. Yeah, great book to share. This synagogue, established in 1925, however, the building was actually a railway station before it became a synagogue. It has a unique in that respect. The building actually served as a train station prior to becoming a synagogue. And today has still been in continuous use since that time as the northernmost synagogue in Europe. Trondheim, I don't know if anyone's been to Trondheim. I was in Bergen, Norway, but never to Trondheim.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Doesn't the building in Trondheim look like the one in David Hodok? The shape of it?
The shape of it actually does, although I think that's coincidence more than anything, but it does kind of look like that. Yes. I'm trying to pull up the information I have on the Trondheim community, both the northernmost and the only one that served as a train station. But Jews actually first came in the 1880s to Trondheim and very quickly became integrated in the community. Unfortunately, the community never really fully recovered from the mass deportation in 1942 during the Holocaust. But the synagogue also houses a Jewish museum that opened in 1997 to celebrate the city's 1000th anniversary. And so it has exhibits to the Jews in Norway and the Jews in Trondheim. And it also focuses on the history of the Jewish community there. So it's a site not only for the Jews in Trondheim, but actually a site that the community goes to learn about Jewish life. So that's the northernmost synagogue in Europe. Jackie, did you want to?
No.
Okay.
Mistake.
We just have a few minutes left. We're gonna move to the even further north than Trondheim, the North Star Synagogue in Arkhangelsk, Russia. This is Siberia, the northernmost synagogue and the northernmost Jewish community center in the world, built actually just completed a few years ago. This synagogue was built in partnership with the chief rabbi and the Jewish Federation of Russia and Chabad, but you can see, we'll look at what the interior looks like, really more of a community center, and this is where the sanctuary is. We will move through. And I'll show another picture of the exterior of the building, but the entrance, you kind of walk through a Jewish star. You can see that this building, this is kind of a multi-purpose space where the services take place. And just the exterior of the building right here has a Jewish star as the entryway that you walk through to enter the building, a unique design, and just opened a couple of years ago, the northernmost JCC in the world and the second northernmost synagogue in the world, at least according to my research. The northernmost synagogue, as I think Lynn suggested at the beginning, is in Alaska, in Fairbanks, Alaska, appropriately named Congregation Or Hatzafon, Light of the North. This congregation is really a converted house. It's actually right in a neighborhood. We'll look at the picture. Is a member of the Union for Reform Judaism. This is a picture of the synagogue, and we'll look at the street. It could be kind of any street that any of us live on, but is kind of alongside houses in a neighborhood street. Here's the other side of the street. And this community, yeah.
Rabbi?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
That's okay. When we were in Fairbanks, we were in like a Walmart or something like that. And there was a Chabad rabbi walking through there. We couldn't figure out, he must be associated with something in there because his family lives in Fairbanks, right? You know, we don't know where we were, but we thought it was kind of strange.
Yeah, no, well, so Chabad has made it all over the place, right? They're not affiliated. This particular synagogue is a Reform congregation, so right. I don't know much about what Chabad is doing there, but Jews have been in Alaska for a long time and have played a prominent part in Alaskan history, really since it became part of the United States in 1867. The Jewish community formed in 1904. And this particular synagogue, this Fairbanks community was incorporated in 1980. There's about 300 Jews in the Fairbanks area. And this serves as the distinction of being the northernmost synagogue in the world. They voted in 1994 to affiliate with the Reform movement, and since then has been a Reform congregation, a member of the Union for Reform Judaism. And so that takes us on our tour north of Cleveland all the way to the northernmost synagogue in the world. Next week, we'll go south to the southernmost synagogues. And I know it's 11 now. Are there any last thoughts or comments or questions? As next week, we kind of go in the opposite direction towards the South Pole.
The question is, has anyone experienced Shabbat in like June that far north?
Right. So I'll mention kind of as a final note, as you go farther north, right, Shabbat times do change. Of course, if you're above the Arctic Circle, which I don't think we quite got to in Fairbanks, but you get close when you get to a point where there's 6 straight weeks with no sunlight. But Shabbat comes in Fairbanks and in Trondheim, in the other communities as well. When you get to December, January, Shabbat is coming in around 2 p.m. On Friday afternoon, a little after 2. And so it gets and of course in summer months it starts around midnight, 11 p.m.
I have to
midnight.
say, yeah, it's still light at midnight in Anchorage in July. It's
Right.
wild.
So Shabbat gets interesting to celebrate and observe when you go that far north, and when you get far enough north that you don't have any sunlight. The response, although there's no organized Jewish community, say that you look at the nearest Jewish community due south of you and you just use their times when you get to a place where there just isn't sunlight or isn't darkness.